Alrighty, welcome to lesson 32. I'm really excited because this lesson starts to get into more actual algebra, which is really exciting since some of the lessons earlier were more review lessons, and I'm excited to actually jump into algebra with you. So I'm sure you've done basic algebra equations that use letters instead of numbers. For instance, maybe n plus 1 equals 3, and then you solve that problem and you figure out, oh, n equals 2. So hopefully you've seen algebra equations like that. And from now on, we're going to be using more and more letters instead of numbers because we are getting to more and more advanced algebra. Now those letters we call variables. So if you hear someone talking about variables, they're probably talking about letters, and usually we use X or N, sometimes A and B and C. Usually we don't use letters like J or Q. So just to let you know, it's not like we couldn't use those letters, but these are probably the more common ones. So let's look at an expression like this, which is not too difficult. I'll use n again. 11 plus n equals 15. So what can you tell me about this equation? Well, we know we have 11, that's a known number, and then we're going to be adding that to this variable, to this unknown number, to get a total or a sum of 15. So hopefully you know how to solve this kind of problem. The goal of algebraic equations is always to get the variable, the letter, all by itself. So currently it's not by itself because of this 11, so let's get rid of that. We'll subtract 11 from both sides. 11 minus 11 is 0, so that can just go away. And we end up with n equals 4. So that is how we evaluate or how we analyze an algebra equation like that, and hopefully that made sense to you. Now we've also been talking about multiplication and division and the different ways that we can represent that. And one reason why we aren't saying 4 times 2, for instance, is because this x right here can kind of look like a variable since we often use that in as a variable. So instead we might do 4.2 or even 4 right next to a 2 with only parentheses in between the two numbers. So this means that there's multiplication going on. Now for variables, they actually could get even closer together. So if you see, let's say, an x and a y, you might see x times y with a little dot in between, and that means multiplication. You also might see x and a y with parentheses around the y. And you might also just see xy, which means that there's also multiplication happening. Now, why can't we do that with numbers? Well, if we did that with numbers and wrote them next to each other without any parentheses, we get a completely different number. 42 is not the same thing at all as 4 times 2. So that's why we can't do that with numbers. But with the variables, we can put them side by side right next to each other without confusing ourselves. And it's important to remember that this means multiplication. That might take a little bit to get used to. It might even be a good idea to write down these different ways to express multiplication. Sometimes we have a dot, sometimes we have parentheses, and sometimes we have nothing in between two variables. And all of those mean multiplication. So let's take a look at a sample problem, xy plus x. So let's just talk about this. What do you see? Well, I see some addition, so we're going to be adding something. And the first thing we're going to be adding is this part right here, x times y. There's multiplication happening right here, just like we learned about. So whatever x equals is going to be multiplied by y, and then that amount is going to be added to x. So let's go ahead and actually get some numbers plugged into here. Let's say you know through your secret spy network that x equals 2 and y equals 4. So if x equals 2 and y equals 4, what would the value of this expression be? So what I would recommend doing is putting parentheses around every single element of your equation. I know it's getting a little messy. Maybe I should copy it again. X times y plus x. And the reason for that is because we're going to be substituting these numbers in for the letters, and if we don't stay very, very organized, it'd be easy to get confused. So let's go ahead and look at this again. If x times y plus x is our expression, and we know x is 2 equals 2 and y equals 4, what would the value of this expression be? Well, let's go ahead and, instead of writing x this time, let's write a 2, because we know x is equal to 2. Instead of writing a y, let's write a 4. And then we're going to be adding that to x, which is 2. And now we can further simplify. Now, do we multiply first or do we add? Well, as you hopefully remember in our order of operations lesson, we need to multiply first. So 2 times 4 is 8. And we can go ahead and drop the parentheses now, because they kind of serve their purpose. And now we can just copy down what we have remaining. 8 plus 2 equals 10. So 10 would be the value of that expression if x was equal to 2 and y was equal to 4. So is this hard? No, it's actually almost like cracking a code. You have the legend or the answer right here, and you just need to plug that into the right places in this expression to get the correct value. But as you can see, if you don't stay very organized, it's easy to substitute the wrong number in the wrong place or to forget that there's multiplication or addition going on. So what I recommend is recopying the original expression, putting parentheses around every letter, every variable, and then carefully substituting the numbers for the letters, again copying it down right below, and then go ahead and start simplifying, starting with multiplication and then adding or subtracting, and then you finally will get your answer, which you would put a box around. Then I would put a box around your work and label it. Let's say this was problem 12. Label it problem 12. That way if you have a problem with your problem, you could easily go back and reference your work. So this was lesson 32, getting deeper into algebra, learning more about variables and evaluating different expressions. So that just means finding the value of a certain algebraic phrase or algebraic equation. And the most important thing to remember is to stay organized. Do not try to do it in your head. Do not try to be super smart and not write anything down. It just takes work. It takes organization. And it's a good time to learn how to do basic equations, because these, believe it or not, are actually very, very basic algebra equations. And if you don't learn good organization skills now, it's going to be much harder to learn later. All right, let me know if you have any questions.